start by asking when you first encountered Stafford or Stafford's ideas, whichever came first.
I first encountered Stafford's ideas through Raúl Espejo, who gave a seminar in Los Andes University when I was working in the city council, and he introduced me to the VSM, and I really, really, really loved the idea of the VSM. And a few years later, I've lost my husband, and he left me some money, and we were very passionate about cybernetics, so he sort of ordered me before he died to come and do a master on cybernetics, which I did. I wrote to Raúl and came to Aston University in Birmingham, and I started my master in cybernetics. It was going to be an MPhil on BSM and information systems in 1988. And I met Stafford in 1989 when he was president of the Operational Research Society in Cambridge. I met him thanks to Roger Harden, who was a close friend of Stafford. He was also my peer PhD student in Aston University under Raúl's supervision. And Roger told Stafford that I was going to be there, told me to go to Cambridge. So when I came to Cambridge, Stafford knew about me. And I first approached him very nervously because I had enormous admiration for him. And I wasn't sure if I have completely understood his theory, so I was very nervous to talk to him. And he immediately embraced me and say, when I said I am Angela Espinosa, PhD student from Raúl Espejo, he said, I was waiting for you. So you are at last coming to me, the cybernetic angel. And then he embraced me and sort of kidnapped me from this conference, and we spent the next 3 days walking around Cambridge and talking about Latin America. He was fascinated to have a Latin American PhD student studying the VSM, and I was fascinated with all his love and passion for Latin America. So we talk a lot about cyber scene in Latin America, and that was the beginning of a long friendship. Then after that, he invited me to Manchester Business School. He invited me to meet him in the coffee shop at 12 o'clock one day. And then we talked more about cybernetics, about my PhD thesis. And then he started inviting me every now and then to his cottage in Wales. And at that point, we were already very close friends. And he became my mentor. He really trained me and helped me not only to develop my PhD and understand deeply cybernetics, but also to understand myself, my relationship with the world, and he did a lot of spiritual training with me in his cottage in Wales. And after that, he continued helping me because for the next 10 years I went back to Colombia under his recommendation and to try to do some practice on the VSM, because he was convinced that in Latin America there were better possibilities to put the VSM into practice than here in England. He always said that the British were the best in the world to invent new theories, but they was in the world to put them into practice, too careful, too nervous to make mistakes, while Latin Americans were much more keen to jump into experimentation. So I did, following his advice. He said, go to Colombia, stay there for 10 years, try to put these ideas into practice, and then you can come back to England, and then you can engage as an academic with some reputation and respect after you have proved that this works in practice. And it was like a kind of a magician saying what my life was going to be like, because that's exactly what happened. I went back to Colombia, had 10 years of applications of the VSM, came back to England 10 years later, and then I have been the last, and that's when very shortly before he died. So, but until the moment he died, we were very close friends, and we were talking all the time and in the phone, and I had a lot of correspondence with him, beautiful, beautiful letters, and he's been the most influential person in my life, without any doubt.
Okay. If you were introducing them to someone who didn't know anything about him, how would you introduce him?
Well, I think that he was I think that he was a genius. I think that he was, I mean, amazingly deep, amazingly. His way of looking at the world was completely multidisciplinarily. He was a very unique academic because he was not sticking to a particular theory or discipline. His discipline, he self-educated himself, and he developed these theories in a way that was really systemic. I will say that his understanding of the world was the most holistic understanding of the world I've ever seen, and his practice of his knowledge, of his wisdom. He was a very keen, charming person, a very impressive character. When you see him, very impressive, and you will feel enormous respect and admiration because his physical figure was very imponent. Was a very tall guy, very strong character, but very charming at the same time. Once he was relaxed after when you were not talking about work with him. He was always capable of laughing, enjoying music, enjoying having a drink, talking about politics, very passionate about politics, very astute about politics. He did understand very well the complexities of politics, and very humane, very interested in people, very interested in you, in who you are. He was always asking about me, about my family, about my son. He was very aware of all the difficulties that I had emotionally when I was younger. And he was always very interested in making sure that I was all right and that I was growing spiritually and intellectually, and that I was capable of developing my potential fully. So he was very generous with his time, very focused in helping, very unique, very wise, extraordinary. Being with him was always a huge privilege and a beautiful experience. And many times when I was seeing him in the cottage and coming back to Birmingham in the train, I felt like he was if he was put myself in another level of consciousness through the conversations with him. I really started looking at the world in a completely different way that I would have never been able to do it on my own. So very unique character, very impressive, and very charming, and very knowledgeable and very wise.
Okay, so what would you suggest would be his main legacy at this point in time?
I think that his main legacy was to develop organizational cybernetics. He called it the science to understand organizational effectiveness. But he was the pioneer and continued to be in understanding organizational complexity. For me, the VSM is the only theory that I am aware of that goes so deeply in being able to map an organization, to model an organization in a language that is universal, that is a little bit abstract, but it's absolutely practical at the same time, because it helps you to visualize like the patterns of interaction of a very complex organization and make sense of it. So it's extremely useful as a way of observing, sensing, and making sense of organizations. And when you are dealing with organizations that are incredibly complex, the traditional approaches are not good enough. I mean, it's not good enough to understand the finances of an organization or the cultural aspects or the strategic aspects or the informatic aspects on their own, or the people aspects. But the way that VSM allows you to do it is much more systemic, much more holistic, and is very practical and effective. So I think that the VSM is his main contribution to science. And team's integrity. Integrity was like the last invention that was the way of understanding more in-depth group communications and how to make group decisions effectively in a completely democratic and participatory way, in which everybody will have the same right to speak, everybody will be considered an equal in a conversation, and everybody will be given the opportunity of being very creative, very ingenious, and as a result of that, when you do that, the process of integration, the reverberation that emerges from this process is one of the most satisfying collective group experiences that I have had in my life. And I have led at least 12 integrations in my life and be a participant in many, many others. And in every one, I have felt this effect of nearly magic when you finish as integration, in which there is like the emergence of a collective consciousness. And it's a process that I haven't experienced in any other methodology. So I think that in general, the theory of BSM and team's integrity are still 50 years later, hasn't been copied, hasn't been improved completely by anyone, because they are so powerful and so robust that we can continue using them, we can continue developing them. There are many things that have emerged in cognitive sciences, in technology, but things like agile management, no? He was the pioneer of an agile management. Things like all the issues about the social media and communications, he had enormous things to contribute with respect to how to improve social processes of communication and organizational process of learning and cognition. So I think that his contribution is still alive, and there is more and more people interested in the VSM as the time goes by. The number of books on the VSM has been increasing exponentially, published in the last 20 years since he passed away, as well as the number of papers and the community. We are experiencing that in the Mental Forum. The community of people interested is just getting more vibrant, more exciting, and more creative.
Okay, so you want to talk about work in practice?
Okay, so
I'll let you lead it in.
Yeah, well, many people wonder if the VSM works in practice. My whole life has been in academic life and professional life has been trying to demonstrate that it works in practice. My experience has been amazingly satisfactory. I have put into practice the VSM in Colombia for 10 years. I put it into practice with the government at the national level, and we did. I led the National Auditing Office project that was a very famous cybernetic project in Colombia in 1994, 1998, and we trained 600 auditors in the VSM. We restructured the National Auditing Office using the VSM in a very effective way. And we used we did the VSM, what we call systemic auditing, that was VSM diagnosis, in 60 national organizations, some of them with dramatic results, really, really important changes. The project was very famous in Colombia. And at the same time, I led a project that was to rethink the school system in Colombia using the VSM and cybernetics, which didn't conclude, but had 2 years that were fantastic, and the learning was enormous, and we managed to do some prototypes of what will be a systemic education and how the educational agencies will be more effective, more participatory, democratic, with better governance systems. Enormous learning, and that had an impact in the education system in Colombia even nowadays. I did use the VSM in the environmental sector in Colombia. We learned to map and understand not environmental agencies, but ecoregions, and understand how to manage the ecoregions to improve the governance of the ecoregions using the VSM. And that was, again, fantastic experience and a lot of learning. And another project to support the implementation of a national program to fight poverty, in which you use the ideas of the CyberSyn project for 4 years, involving communities and the poorest people in the country to participate in decisions about where to invest the money, and to monitor and observe the results of the implementation of these programs. And it was the best project, the most exciting project, because we really got to work with very poor people, with citizens of all sorts of municipalities in Colombia, and gave them the opportunity to participate and to be democratically active about it. And this was all inspiring the VSM and the CyberSyn project. Very beautiful. And then after that, I've done many consultancies in a Latin American corporation, building corporation, helping them to align the strategy with the structure, in a corporate national broadband corporation in Colombia, helping them to reorganize their governance system. In Oman, to redesign a startup government organization. In Romania, applying the VSM to reorganize a school, a group of schools in Cluj. In the NHS, in the National Health Service in England, to help a health trust to improve their performance during the COVID and to improve their performance in a particular unit, a surgery unit in this trust. And I can give you many examples. These are just examples of applications. In every one of the applications, I've learned a lot, and the people I've been working for have learned a lot, and the level of satisfaction of people and the learning has been unique. People have always been very happy. Obviously, you cannot sort out all the problems of a very complex organization in 6 months, but you can produce much deep learning that you will have done with other techniques, other approaches to organizational development. So in that respect, my experience is that it does work amazingly. And in education, the majority of my life I have been an educator, and I have been teaching system thinking and cybernetics in Colombia, in England, in Romania, Singapore, Hong Kong, Oman, Cuba, Mexico, in many, many places. My experience teaching the VSM has been absolutely satisfactory. I've always had the experience of students getting very enthusiastic about the VSM, learning a lot about it, and feeling that it is giving them another perspective on organization, a completely different paradigm on what is an organization, a completely different lens on how to observe what is relevant in organizations, and a way to facilitate dialogue and communication between people in organizations that is not common in many other organizational approaches. So I will say that it does definitely work in practice for consultancy, for education, and for practical reasons. There is enormous amount of evidence that it works, and is really a nice experience to do, a really important thing to learn.
Good. That's great. Do you feel any need for anything more?
Well, no, the only thing is thinking if Stafford was alive today in this world in torment.
Yeah, do that one.
Okay, yeah, so if Stafford was alive today, what do you think he'd be doing, thinking?
I think that if he was alive today, he will insist in coming back to the idea that he had at one moment of doing the World's Integrity Project. When he organized the World's Integrity Project in 1994, he was testing team's integrity, but his idea was to do an experiment with 30 countries running 30 integrations in parallel, trying to find out if we were going to design a world constitution, what would be the principles of this world constitution. He was convinced that if we generated agreements at the world level about the basic rules of the game, that are the basics of a constitution at the world level, there will be more possibilities of peace and progress. And I think that he was very right. Unfortunately, that process collapsed. And in this moment, the elements, the basic principles of every constitution, international laws, and everything has been eroded by the current geopolitical crisis, wars, and the power of the billionaires, the ones that are in control of the social media and the communication technologies and industries and the war industry. Those that have interests have the power to completely change and erode any principles. I think that the majority of the people in the world, if we were given the opportunity to speak out, will be saying, this is not where we want to go. We want to go differently. We want to create a peaceful world, a world where every one of us is respected, have the possibility of having a decent life, and we can recover and restore the damage that we have created with nature, because without having a healthy nature, we are not going to survive as a species. I do think that it's not impossible to consider again doing an effort internationally to agree on the basic principles toward coexistence and create citizens' assemblies that exist in this moment. Even some cyberneticians have been doing experiments at the world level with citizen assemblies that represent the voice of the people and that can start getting influence in the governments in such a way that the governments will have to be forced to listen to the will of the people. Stafford in Chile talk about science for the people, and that's something that many people haven't understood. Many people thought that the CyberSyn project was a technocratic project to control the people. I'm convinced that if you read deeply and understand what Stafford was trying to say, he said it, and we saw it in the archive in the collection this week. He says, what I'm doing is the science for the people, to allow the people to self-govern themselves, to self-regulate themselves. And I think that we have the science, the understanding, and what we need is to educate people around the world to be able to put it into practice. Thank you.